Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the last of our Moon Lecture series for this fall. It's been a great series, and thank you to all of you for your support and your presence during the series. There will be a follow-up discussion from tonight's lecture on Sunday at 11:30 upstairs in the Education Building. Do please come and be part of a conversation about the issues that our lecturer raises this evening. And of course, I always put in the little reminder that there's another event that happens here on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. You're welcome to come and share in the celebration of this community, which is always an exciting time on Sunday morning. Please make sure that you look through the little booklet that you were handed as you came in that gives you information about all the goings-on at St. Mark's during the Advent Christmas season. There's a lot of stuff happening, and it's a great place to find your spirit uplifted and restored, and we all need that this season. Amen? Yeah, right. After the lecture this evening, there will be a reception, as usual, across in Wesley Hall, so just follow the crowd out the door to the left, and there's some things to drink and eat over there, so do please come and take an opportunity to meet Maria Hinojosa. So, I was asked to mention, we don't normally make announcements, but there is a Defend Immigrant Rights a rally happening on Monday at the outside the ICE office on Capitol Mall. So it's at 10:30. There are some little flyers, and they'll be out on the table. If you're interested, please pick one up. So it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Hinojosa. She's a remarkable woman, and she has done amazing things for our nation. She has been an extraordinary window into the Latino world for those of us who aren't Latino. And she fought the battle. I hadn't realized it was 25 years ago that she started Latino USA on National Public Radio. And I always sense when I hear her interviewing people and making presentations that there is a very warm heart, a human being that's engaging at a very human level, the people that she's interviewing. And she has certainly opened up a number of worlds that many of us would never hear about other than through her work. So thank you, Maria, for all that you do, for enabling us to hear and to see, even though it's on the radio, what is going on in the world around us. You are an extraordinary blessing to us. And we're excited that you're here, and I need to just shut up and let you come up and speak.
Hello. Wow, it's a Friday night and you guys are all here. I said to the pastor, is this normal? He says, no, not necessarily. So this is really special. Thank you, Pastor, for such a beautiful introduction. I think that's like one of my all-time favorites, where the pastor actually didn't give the long line of awards and et cetera, but just spoke from the heart. So that means a lot to me. So I appreciate that, Pastor. And thank you for having me here in your place of worship. I feel very, I don't know, it's not usual for me to be standing in front of a congregation, so I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Am I wearing the right color? Glad I didn't wear the other mini skirt, just brought it just in case, but it is a little colder in Sacramento. You're like, why didn't you wear the mini skirt? I'm really thrilled to be here, mostly because I feel this as a moment of communion with my fellow Americans. And we kind of need that. We kind of need these moments of communion to find ourselves and to see ourselves in each other, and to uplift ourselves, because we really need it these days. I know I certainly do. Today's been a huge news day. I know, everything is just like exploding, and yet I knew I was going to be talking to you tonight about my perspective and my story, so I actually wasn't watching the news. The hotel where I'm staying at is right next to where there's a Metallica concert tonight. So there's a really interesting vibe going on where I'm at. But I was thinking more about what I wanted to communicate with you tonight. So I know that there's a lot happening. And I think part of what we're all experiencing is what it is to be gaslit, because we know that what just happened today is huge. And yet it's just another day in this administration. And yet it is huge what is happening today, over the next few days. And we will see together as a country how this evolves. So I'm going to start with a story that I have told ever since I discovered this story, which was in the process of writing my second book, my memoir about raising my son. It's called Raising Raul, Adventures Raising Myself and My Son. And in doing that book, I needed to do some interviews with my own family, and so I asked my mom to tell me what was our arrival story. And so that was in the late 1990s when by then I wasn't a woman. I was already over 30, and I didn't know the exact arrival story. I know that my dad was born in Tampico and that he was a science nerd and that he became a medical doctor dedicated to research in the inner ear, and he was given a job at the University of Chicago because he was this little genius, may he rest in peace. And he became an American citizen immediately. And my mom and the four of us, my sister and my two brothers, we came to meet my father in Chicago 6 months after he had already arrived, and that we arrived with green cards. That's about as much as I knew. So when I asked my mom the story, and I found out the story, it's one that I've incorporated in almost every speech that I've given. And I'm going to tell it to you the way I normally would. And then I'm going to tell it to you in a different way. So the story goes that my mom was going to meet my dad in Chicago with the four of us. And so she flew from Mexico City to Chicago. There were no direct flights, so we had to fly from Mexico City to Dallas, change planes in Dallas, and then fly on to Chicago. It was the 1960s, and I was a baby in arms. My sister was 7, my brother was 5, my other brother was 3. And we were flying in Mexico. It was the 1960s, so my mom was looking very beautiful on that day. She's smaller than me. I'm wearing 5-inch heels now, so you can see me, otherwise it would be like this. But mom was wearing little kitten heels, pearls, a petticoat dress with the petticoat, and traveling with 4 kids under the age of 7 for the first time on an airplane. So you can imagine, sounds like a horror. But we do the airplane trip fine. We arrive into Dallas in the airport. We're doing immigration there, and my mom meets the immigration agent at the immigration checkpoint in the airport, and he's this very tall, kind of Marlboro man. This is an audience that actually knows what I mean when I say the Marlboro man. Y'all are old enough to know what I'm talking about. He's like Mr. Marlboro man, 6'5", Texan. And if there's any Texans here, please excuse me because I'm about to imitate a Texan accent. So the story goes that the gentleman he has the green cards in his hand, and he says, "Well, now, ma'am, I do see that everything is in order right here for yourself and these 4 children to come into the United States. I see that you all have your green cards in order, ma'am. There is only one little problem, ma'am. You are going to be able to come up north to Chicago with yourself and 3 older children, but the little baby, me, she's going to have to stay here. We're going to have to keep her in quarantine, but you can come on up to Chicago." And the way the story goes is that, my mom, I would always tell this story that there was this voice that came. When I heard this story, I was like, there was this visceral, guttural voice that came out of my mom and reached up to the, Texas and almost grabbed his bicep, but she knew enough to not actually grab him. But with her voice in the airport, she looked up to me and she said, "Sir, my name is Berta Hinojosa, and my husband is Dr. Raul Hinojosa. And you can call the University of Chicago because he has been invited to come to this country by the president of the University of Chicago. I don't know if it's true, but you can call him because we are coming into this country. Sir, do you see we have permission to come into this country? My children have green cards. I have a green card. We are going to go to Chicago, sir, to meet my husband at the University of Chicago. Do you understand that, sir? And he said, I do, ma'am. Come on in. It's a great story. I know, it's a great story. This summer, at the height of children being taken from their parents at the border, I was in an airport, actually in Chicago, and I was traveling, I don't know where, and the phone rang, and it was my mom. And I said, hey, ma, ¿qué pasa? And she said, ay, mijita. And she was crying. Don't start crying, because I'm going to start crying. She was crying. And I was like, ma, ¿qué pasa? Ay, mijita, she said. Do you understand? They were trying to do that to you. It could have been you. I said, what are you talking about, Mom? She says, the kids that they're taking from their parents, that was you. That was what they tried to do to you. That story that you tell, that was you. And that voice that you think of as that powerful voice, it was me as a mother responding to the fight or flight. I was going to fight to make sure that he did not take you away. That was going to be you, mijita. Do you understand? And now, she said, I'm sitting here in tears because I understand those moms. I understand what they went through. They had their children taken away from them. And I know that I had that voice. And I was able to speak up because I had that privilege. And now all I can do is feel hopeless because of them. That's a story I've been telling for years. And it was just in 2018 when I realized it could have been me. They've been taking children away from parents for a long time. I mean, in the 1960s, obviously. I mean, my question is, what were they going to do with me? Where were they going to put me? That's an investigative piece I should do at some point, because what were they going to do? Where were they taking these children who had a rash, and therefore they were putting them into quarantine, and who knows? So that happened in the earlier part of the summer. And then, in the latter part of the summer, something else happened, which some of you may have heard me talk about, but I never in my life ever imagined that I'd be in a Methodist church talking about this to you. But, you know, I'm a journalist, I deal in facts. Pastor said he said I speak with love in my heart, and most of the time that is in fact how I operate as a journalist. And because I'm a public person and I understand what this means to be able to have a voice, I do share things like these stories that maybe you'd be like, oh, how could she talk about that? But that's part of what I see as my civic duty, because I can do this. And frankly, as I've gotten older, I've become even more fearless. Can I say a 4-letter word here? I mean, I just don't give a shit anymore. I'm sorry, Pastor. I know you've never heard that word before. I know it's a bit of a shock to you. Forgive me. I know you're cool, though. So, that was the beginning of my summer. My mom making that call, and of course, all of the trauma. And me talking about the fact that children being taken from their parents, actually, they were taking children from indigenous folks because they were saying that we were savages. They were taking children from Africans who were born into slavery because we were property. They were taking children who were Japanese American and saying we were threats and putting us into internment camps. What the hell is that? It's imprisonment, and it's not a camp. They have been taking children away from parents in this country for a long time. This is not new. And yes, Barack Obama did it too. as did George W., as did Bill Clinton, as did George H.W. Bush, as did Ronald Reagan. This is not new. But certainly this moment in history is like none other that we can remember. And so yes, we have to be aware of this. And a lot of what we're experiencing is very confusing because it's so in our faces. So that's right. When I see Dr. Christine Blasey Ford talking about the fact that she is only coming to terms in the recent years of the fact that she was violently sexually assaulted when she was 15 years old, and how people, when this came out and so many people were saying, well, come on. It happened when you were 15. Come on, get over it. Come on. What do you mean you didn't remember? Come on. And that's when I had to speak up and say, wow, that was me. That happened to me. And all of the people, because I think that if it hadn't happened to me, I'd probably be one of those people who's like, come on, it happened when you were 15. Like, seriously, like you're, and it's like, no, actually. Actually, women know very clearly what it is to be harassed and catcalled, and we know the big difference between that and being sexually assaulted and raped. We're not confused. But there is so much shame that I basically grew up thinking that it was all my fault. I went with him. I used to say it wasn't a real rape. It was, it was like a baby rape. That's what I would say. Those were the words out of my mouth. I started having to confront this in a period of time in my life when so much was kind of exploding and potentially combusting and disappearing. And so when I started having to do work around my rape 2 or 3 years ago, and thankfully I have a therapist who actually specializes in sexual assault and trauma and women who have been trafficked. And I was doing this work with my husband. We did a therapy session, and I remember my husband, we've been married 27 years, and my husband looked at the therapist and said, but I knew something had happened, but why didn't she talk about it for all these years? And my therapist said, I have clients who are women who have been sexually trafficked by their husbands, and they refuse to believe that they have been raped. So women find a way to not label what we've experienced as that because of shame and all of these complicated feelings, and that was me. And so it was actually during the crisis of the conversation around Dr. Blasey Ford and this dude named Kavanaugh, who I have a very difficult time calling Justice, unless I call him Activist Justice Kavanaugh. So all of us, all of the women in this room, if it wasn't you, you had sisters, you had best friends, you had relatives, you had others who were talking to you about, oh my God, I'm rethinking everything that happened many years ago. And in that same process, as I was waking up and thinking about my therapist's name, which I hadn't said in 40 years, I did even more therapy, and then I realized I actually had been lying to myself. I had been telling myself forever that it had happened when I was 17, as if that somehow made it better, because 17 was the age that my mom was when she got married to my dad. So if I got raped when I was 17, well, no, actually I was raped when I was 16. I was like, I would make a terrible witness, because I've been saying for years, well, it happened when I was 17. In the process of doing therapy, because of what was happening with the Supreme Court confirmation, I had to realize that I had actually been telling myself another story. The reality for me over this summer was that the two most intimate parts of myself were front and center in the narrative of the story of America in this moment in 2018. It was the story of being an immigrant baby who could have been taken away, and it was the story of myself identifying with another American woman as a survivor of rape. and as a survivor of silence. This was definitely not what I was expecting in the year 2018, to have these two parts of myself kind of come into this collision and be raw in front of all of you. And I'm okay. I'm fine, actually. And actually, it's been really important because a lot of this has meant that we're getting this stuff out. It's really not easy. And it is a challenging time. I cannot lie. I know that April Ryan was here recently. We just interviewed her on Monday for our politics podcast. If you don't know about podcasts, we'll do the lesson afterwards in the reception. But if you do, I need you to subscribe to Latino USA and to In the Thick. Latino USA, as you know, 25 years, Peabody Award-winning podcast. We love it. And In the Thick is a podcast that we created 2 years ago, because after being invited to be on Meet the Press 7 times in a row, I was so thankful, and my dad got a chance to see me before he passed away. They stopped inviting me, like literally dropped me like a hot potato in 2015. I got very upset, and my staff saw me very upset, and because I felt like I had finally been included in the national conversation of politics, and then all of a sudden I was like excluded, and it felt terrible. And then my staff was like, well, let's just create our own Meet the Press. We're just gonna call it In the Thick, and it's not gonna be about a bunch of white folks talking about politics. It's gonna be mostly people of color talking about politics. Because we do, actually. So I'm so glad that we have all come to meet April Ryan as a result of what's happening now. And so there are those silver linings. We know who she is, like we know who Yamiche Alcindor is, like we know who Abby Phillip is. We know them now as American women who are heroes in our country. And yet, at the same time, for me, this strange thing has happened where I have had to recognize that I am 5 things that this president doesn't, well, probably more, but at least 5 things that this president doesn't like. I'm Mexican, I'm an immigrant, I'm a journalist, I'm a woman, I'm flat-chested. Thank you. So, I know, I'm making you very uncomfortable. A pastor is like, what is she doing now? I'm disarming men from thinking that they can talk about our bodies. That's what I'm doing. I'm disarming them. And this is what it looks like. Feels a little uncomfortable. I understand. But I'm totally comfortable. I'm totally comfortable with owning my voice. In fact, I was saying to Pastor that maybe if it hadn't been for Donald Trump winning, a lot of us would not be this engaged. So is that another part of the silver lining? I remember right after Donald Trump was elected, somebody said, remember that the most amazing art in the United States of America was made during the 1960s, in the middle of the revolts and the protests. And I was like, okay, all right. So there are things that are happening. I feel like we are in many ways touching rock bottom, right? We are touching rock bottom. And that feels very scary. Because we understand that when we touch rock bottom, not everybody's going to make it back up. The other side of touching rock bottom, for those of us who are able to see the message of what's happening, it is the message of, you better get your shit together. We have work to do. So me personally, this happened to me, about 2 years ago. A lot of things were falling apart in my life. And so it felt like rock bottom. I could have lost it all, my marriage, my kids, it was a challenging time, as those of us who are on a spiritual journey understand. Sometimes being those 5 things that this president doesn't like, and being a Latina journalist in the United States of America, being the first Latina at NPR ever, the first Latina anchor at PBS, the first Latina and the only Latina right now to have a nonprofit newsroom in the United States. So a lot of that time means that you have to build yourself up to be tough and to have a huge ego to put up with everything that is coming at you. But having a huge ego doesn't really work well with your family, you know. So, you know, when my daughter actually famously said on the air on Latino USA, she said, yeah, sometimes I really don't like it when my mom comes home, when Maria Hinojosa comes home. I want my mom. I don't want Maria Hinojosa at home. I want my mom. So I had to do, and I have a very dear friend who is actually a Yoruba priestess, and so a very important spiritual guide, and she was always talking to me about gratitude and about being centered, about spiritual journey, about self-care and self-love, to which I would say, you want me to do self-love? You're criticizing me because you're saying I'm an egomaniac and I'm a narcissist, but you want me to do self-love? I don't get it, which goes to show you how out of touch I kind of was. So I had to hit rock bottom, and it was really scary. Thank God I've got an amazing therapist, you know, because when you have to fight for something, like your love, like your family, you know, I remember her saying, this is going to be embedded in your children's memory, what you did, what you fought for, your own spiritual journey. They will see this. They will see that you fought for love, that you fought for your family. This is what it looks like to put family first. And in this process, I had to do a lot of deep spiritual journey work. And I have been a spiritual person for a long time, but there's another level when you really are in a crisis point and you're hitting rock bottom. And I remember I ask almost everybody who I interview, you know, what do you do when you're in those moments of like, you know, what do you do? How do you pick yourself up? What do you say to yourself to motivate yourself? And in 2015, I interviewed Lidia Cacho. She's a Mexican journalist who has uncovered child trafficking and sex trafficking in Mexico, orchestrated at the highest levels of the Mexican government. So she was kidnapped herself and sexually assaulted by government officials. So she is a survivor. She is a journalist who has never given up. And she was in New York receiving an amazing human rights award, and I interviewed her. She's my age. She looked fabulous, just like amazing. And I said to her, so what do you do? Like, I mean, really, like you've been through hell and back. What do you do? And she said, I do yoga and I meditate. I was like, oh. No, please. No, I do yoga and meditate, please. I was like, look, I do a lot of exercise, but I can't do that. I'm an adrenaline junkie, so I need this thing. By the way, now I'm boxing, and I love it. It's so good for me. I highly recommend it. And then she said, yeah, but you need to meditate. And I was like, oh, you know, the meditation, everybody talks to me about meditation. Look, I can barely sit still. And she was like, and then she got up into my face, which, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily come up into Maria Hinojosa's face, you know, but she did because she's my counterpart. So she got up in my face and she was like, let me ask you something. Do you know how to use apps? I was like, yes. She's like, well, use some apps to meditate until you find the one that works for you. And I was like, yes, ma'am. And so I did. I started downloading free meditation apps of all kinds, hypnosis, this, that, you know, Buddhism, chanting, silence, the bell, everything until I found something that works. And so now I have a daily meditation practice that I've been doing for probably, I don't know, close to 800 days. But who's counting? No, I'm really, really proud of this because it was, in fact, that desire to go on that kind of a spiritual journey that has allowed me to understand and to process what we're going through without completely losing it, so that I focus so much more like you, I'm sure, as the pastor says, to focus on the gratitude. I mean, we're here on a Friday night. And I don't think that people here necessarily are feeling afraid tonight in here. That's a blessing. because there are people in your community 5 minutes from here who are living in fear right now. And so we are, in fact, blessed. We have so much to be grateful for. And that does, in fact, center us. Especially for me, when I'm hearing the stories about what I'm hearing, it's very important for me to be centered on gratitude. I am deeply concerned about about my fellow journalists, their lives. You know, April Ryan has private security. She has to. In the interview that I did with April on Monday, she actually helped me to change my mind and revise my thinking on some of the things you may have seen. I've been on national television saying, I'm not sure why professional journalists should be in the White House press office, you know, being lied to every day. And April said, what would the message be if we walked away and boycotted, especially for women of color? And if the women of color are not in that room asking those questions will never be asked. So my sense of wanting to protect them from being disrespected on a daily basis, you know, was balanced by April saying, we need to be there. And she's like, I'm okay. Yes, it hurts, but we need to be there. But you know, this is a moment when so many of us feel targeted. We know right now that if you're undocumented and you're an activist, you could be targeted. This is truly a confusing time. The diversity in our American media has actually decreased, not increased. It's decreased in our mainstream media. In fact, we have fewer journalists now than we have steelworkers. At the height of the steelworker bust, steel industry in the United States, there were probably 500,000 steelworkers, and around the same time, there were about 500,000 journalists. There are now about 125,000 steelworkers and about 86,000 journalists. We should all be afraid. We should all be afraid. And just last night, the man in the White House tweeted out, "Enemy of the people" again, as we are commemorating the murders of journalists that happened as we end this year. So this is not a time for me to be quiet. It's not a time, but it is confusing because, you know, if I would have told you, hey, this year we're gonna see and hear, because we actually don't get to see these images, right? Journalists are not allowed into these places where they are holding these children, but we were able to hear them crying. You know, people right now who were born on the US side of the Texas-Mexico border, many people who were born with the help of midwives, born in the United States, you do know that their citizenship is being questioned right now, right? So it's not that it's not happening, it is happening. We have American citizens whose passports are being taken away and they're being told, come back when you can prove that you really are an American citizen. And they're like, but you just took away my passport. They're like, go get your grammar school records. So that's happening, and at the same time, how many of you knew that the Latina consumer in the United States of America is the most powerful consumer of all? So that's true. In fact, Latinos and Latinas, if we were to be measured as a gross domestic product, it would be the 7th largest GDP, ahead of India and France. Latinos and Latinas in the United States of America. And the highest paid actress in Hollywood right now on television is a Latina, Sofia Vergara. At the same time, Latina adolescents have the highest rate of attempted suicide in our country, and they have had for decades. And so it is confusing, right? Because on the one hand, there's the assault, and on the other hand, there's a response. Like one of the best things that has happened since the midterms is the fact that we can actually show that Latino-Latina political engagement in the electoral process actually increased. Pretty much. I'm thrilled. This is huge. This is huge. So there is a response, right? And the response is engagement. And part of what we've seen is the largest women's movement, or the resurgence of, or the new women's movement, like one that we've never seen before. And we're living through it right now. So a lot of what I'm trying to do in my lectures to audiences that don't look like this, but actually are much younger and much browner, is to tell, because a lot of the students who I speak to are walking around with something, I don't know how many of you have experienced, but something called the imposter syndrome, where they walk around feeling like they don't belong. And of course, I tell them, it's completely normal for you to be walking around feeling like you don't belong because you have a president who is consistently attacking you every single day. He is saying that people who look like you are coming in to bring in, well, what was the caravan supposed to be bringing in? I mean, leprosy, measles, rapists, murderers, communists, atheists. I mean, everything that you could have imagined was coming, right? So we feel that attack. So I have to tell my students, well, look, I'm Mexican, so I have 16 jobs. So I have a media company, but I'm also a professor in 2 places this year, at Barnard, at Columbia. Why did I say that? That's where I went to school. I'm a professor at DePaul University in Chicago and at Harvard, this other place called Harvard, this year. And even with my Latina students at Harvard, graduate students, they are looking at me to be affirmed. They're looking to me to be affirmed. They're at Harvard. And they're still not believing in themselves. I mean, they are, because they're there. But when they're there, they're also just struggling. You know, the pastor said that we do the work that we do in the journalism that we produce with a lot of heart. And it's true. We actually, a lot of the stories that we decide to cover and how we decide to cover it comes from a place of kind of a heart interest. And I'm always looking for stories. I mean, we had dinner, and already I have an email trail going on with a story idea that just came up during dinner just now, and we're already talking about how we can tell this particular story. So this is what we do in the world of journalism. We are always dissecting how to tell these stories with love and from a place of authenticity. So in the year 2015, the year that I lost my father, my best friend, and my cousin, and the year that Meet the Press stopped asking me to be on, that was a year when there was so much coming to a head. And I totally forgot what I was going to tell you. I'm sorry, that happens sometimes. It'll come back to me. Let me flip the page. Okay. It's going to come back to me. I'm like, it's only because of the time change, you guys. It's only because of the time change, all right? You got to give me some slack here, because it's like, you know, I would have been asleep for an hour already. So the fact that I'm standing up here is a miracle. Thank you. There you go. I like the applause. Good. Good save. So I remember the story I was going to tell you. So in that year, I was crying so much, and my staff was seeing me cry so much because I was, you know, so much death around me. And so one of my producers actually asked the question, do Latinos and Latinas cry more than others? So we did this, you know, I was actually recording myself as I was crying in all the places where I was crying. And she was doing an unscientific search into whether or not we cry more. And we put together this beautiful mini documentary, like, do Latinas cry more? Unscientifically, yes. What we realized, though, scientifically, is that tears are actually a part of the healing. You cry after the hurt or the trauma. You know what I'm saying? Like when you trip and fall, you're not crying when you're falling. You're crying after you've fallen. So the crying is part of the healing. The trauma has already happened, now you're crying. And so there I am at Harvard in September. It's my first week on the job. And there's a public reception. I was tweeting about the fact that I was at Harvard and at this reception. And all of a sudden, a student runs in, kind of like breathless, like, oh my God, I knew you were here. I wanted to meet you because it's because of you that I'm here at Harvard. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, it's because of one of your stories that I'm here. And I was like, okay. And I went on to Instagram and went live. Get on Instagram, it's a lot of fun. So the story was that she said, so I'm doing this live on Instagram, and she says, after I heard your story about crying, that's when I decided to apply for my graduate degree at Harvard. I said, I don't understand. She said, I'm Puerto Rican from Texas, and I cry a lot. And my dad would always tell me that I was a chillona, a crybaby, a llorona, a crybaby, and that because I cried so much and was so emotional, I never was going to be able to do anything. And so I always felt like I was less than. And she said, but after I heard your story, I realized that my crying was actually my healing. And it was at that moment when I decided to apply for my degree here at Harvard, and they accepted me, and that's why I'm here. And so the journalism that we tell with this love and kind of organic interest in these stories, in fact, does change lives. Maybe it means something, the fact that we don't use the word illegal to ever describe a human being. You will never hear that term on our air. And that is not something that I learned from a radical Latino studies professor. It's actually something that I learned from someone who could not be more different than me. His name is Elie Wiesel. And he told that to my face when I met him, and I asked him the question, is it proper to use this term, illegal immigrant? He said, there is no such thing as an illegal person. He said, you may have committed a crime, but you yourself are not an illegal person. He says, that's exactly how the Holocaust started. They declared the Jews to be an illegal human being. So we must wipe that word from our vocabularies. We do not refer to an illegal immigrant, or, oh, there was some illegals on the corner, or was she just the illegal who's cleaning my house? They are not illegal. That would mean that any of you who have ever gotten a driving ticket would be from now on known as an illegal driver. Get it? Or if you didn't pay your taxes, you would forever be known as an illegal taxpayer. No, you're a taxpayer who committed an illegal act. You're not an illegal person. Also, we don't use the word minority on the air in my newsroom, because that whole conversation of numerical minority around race is really problematic, because white America is like, we don't want to be a minority. We know how minorities are treated. We don't want to be that. So why use the term? Why use it to refer to what's happening? Plus, let's change the definition of it. And I also don't use the term slave anymore. It's a person who was enslaved. It's not a person who was born a slave. That is also dehumanizing. It is a person who was enslaved or born into slavery and became enslaved. It's little things or big things. The point is that right now each one of us is being challenged. And oftentimes people look at me and they're like, well, what should I do? And I look back and I say, you figure it out. You need to figure it out. One, you don't need to start many new organizations. There are existing organizations that you can work with already. And two, you can start having uncomfortable conversations with your loved ones. What's happening in our country is so much more than a party battle. We're talking about saving our democracy from authoritarianism. It brings me no joy to say that. I mean, you know how horrible, right? You guys know this. We're supposed to be the world's greatest democracy, and we're talking about authoritarianism. But we have to name these things. We have to be able to talk about white supremacy without white folks feeling threatened by that conversation. You know, white supremacists are the ones who were marching in Charlottesville. They were the ones who were saying, you will not replace us. And I look at them and I'm like, you're so stupid. We don't want to replace you. We want to hang out with you, you dummies. We want to work with you. We want to fall in love with you. We want to work for you. We want to have you work for us. Whatever it is, we're not coming to replace you. And so having a conversation about white supremacy is important. We can't hide it. Yeah, it feels uncomfortable, but this country's been doing this for a while, right? We've been figuring this out for a while. And we're not going to go down the tubes. And so the onus is on you. It's on all of us. That's why, honestly, I'm so thrilled to see that you're all here at 7:53 on a Friday night in December. You could be anywhere. You could be anywhere. I'd be at home watching Shameless. It's my new thing. I just watched a couple of great series about Mexico, Ingobernable and La Casa de las Flores, but now I'm watching Shameless because I'm a good Chicago girl. But I'm so appreciative that you're here, that you made the decision to get in your cars and drive, to be in communion with your fellow American citizens and American residents to try to figure this out. I could go on, but I told the pastor, I'll probably go to questions early, and the pastor's like, yeah, you did go to questions early. I just want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for wanting to know more, and for wanting to see yourself in the people most unlike you. Sometimes it's the smallest gesture to just say, I see you. I see you're here. And sometimes we need that, especially from this audience, especially from you. In some ways, you have to work even harder to get out of your comfort zone. I know it's not easy. I do it all the time. I'm in that car, I'm asking, this is how it goes usually. I'll be in a car with a Lyft driver who's usually a white guy over the age of 50, and I'll just say, hey, how you doing, blah, 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 blah. Can I ask you a personal question? And he'll usually say yes, which I'm like, wow, okay. And then I'll say, so who'd you vote for? And they're like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, so you want to? And they'll be like, well, okay, I voted for Trump. Okay, well, let's talk about that, you know? And then at the end, I'll often say, I'll look at them straight in their eyes. I'll find my way to connect straight to their eyes, and I'll say, look at me. I am that Mexican immigrant person. That is me. It's my brother. It's my cousin. It's my father. It's me. And then he'll say, no, it's not. And I'll say, it is. And then if I can, I'll hug him, because I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. And seeing you here tonight makes me feel less afraid. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Maria told me that she thinks she does better with questions than when she speaks. I find that difficult to imagine, but let's take some questions.
Thank you for being here tonight. Are you comfortable telling us why 60 Meet the Press no longer has you on the show?
I wish I could tell you. I don't know. I tried to find out. Black hole, no answer. Look, it happens, you know, I mean, it happens. People just, but it was a little strange. And again, the silver lining is that we created In the Thick, which you are all going to subscribe to, or ask your kids to tell you how to subscribe to on your, or I'm going to teach you. So we now do In the Thick, which is Webby nominated. We've received all kinds of recognition, so we're very happy. It was because of their pushing me out that I created, and it was in fact, I forgot to tell you this story. The reason why I created my company was actually because, well, let's just see, I won't name them, but it's the most important investigative television news program in our country that's been on forever. I think you know what I'm talking about. So when I went to meet with them and they were like, oh, we love you, it would be great. Can you come back after one of these old white guys gets sick or dies? And that's what motivated me to create my own company. So from the things, yeah, I know. I'm understanding that from a negative, we turn it into a positive. It doesn't always work out that way. And by the way, I'm like you, I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened. I guess what makes me sad is that there's a perception then in the United States of America, those people who are still watching the Sunday morning television talk shows, that people of color are not dynamically and deeply engaged in the political conversation in the United States of America, and we are. Why? I've been saying more and more that, especially journalists of color, we are the observers of the canaries in the mine. We're watching the canaries dropping. We're watching the canaries dropping, and journalists of color are saying, the canaries are dropping, the canaries are dropping. And much of our mainstream media that is run at the highest levels by white men are saying to people like me, who's freaking out about the canaries, and they're saying, could you just calm down? Could you just calm down? Why are you getting so excited? Why are you so emotional? Don't you love that as women when they tell us, calm down? So I don't know what happened, but the positive is that I took something from that negative experience and was able to transform it. But one day I'm going to find out. One day. Yes.
Hey, so I'm very happy you mentioned the Christine Ford incident, and I was curious about kind of a buildup of certain things. So I'm going to start with something that seems unrelated. So are you familiar with how in England in the Brexit campaign right now, there's a lot of calls of anti-Semitism from the right towards the left as a way of kind of undermining the...
Yes.
Okay, so in the Christine Blasey Ford incident, Christine Blasey Ford was incredibly almost extraordinary in how valid she was as a witness, where she had all this testimony that she could call back to and things she could point to that proved what she was saying was true. And towards the end of it, there were kind of cynical political operatives pulling kind of these half-baked claims from the woodwork to try and bring the entire testimony down as a whole. So when you're looking at accusations of things like sexual assault in the political spectrum, how do you gauge whether something's true? And how do you avoid the kind of assertion that would happen if everything was taken as true and people were then able to inject their own opinions and use it as their own political speech because of that?
I mean, this is the great challenge that we're facing right now, right? Is that we're not able to agree on what's a fact, on what actually happened. And that's again, it's not damaging just to the Republicans or the Democrats, it's damaging to our entire society. So I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm quite understanding. You're asking me how I'm able to determine that something is fact? Look, I think that overwhelmingly, women are not going to come forward and make these accusations and make things up. I just don't, that's just not how we operate. Having said that, anything is possible, right? I mean, so I think for me, for example, look, how do you, I don't know how you categorize this, and it's not scientific. I'm sorry, Pastor, I'm going to say another four-letter word. But to have a good bullshit detector, to have a radar, right, so that you understand. And that's why what Dr. Blasey Ford did in her testimony where there were so many specifics. The same thing in my testimony, were it true, I would be able to have a bunch of specifics. And then how she looked, as opposed to activist Justice Kavanaugh, how he looked. I mean, I don't know, he looked pretty guilty to me. Somebody who's kind of screaming and pounding and saying it did not happen, it didn't, and how dare you, and how dare you, it's like, yo. And we just got that from watching Law and Order. So, it's very interesting because I'm in the middle of dealing with a story where there is a false accusation that came from a woman. Not about sexual violence, but about a different kind of, and I'm literally in the midst of trying to uncover this. And so it's a challenge for me because as a woman, I don't believe that women come forward with false accusations. But in this particular case, this particular person has a history. So it's not out of the blue. There's a history. There's a history of this particular person. And so I'm like, that's where I'm like, no, I think she may be making this up in this particular case. But that's, I guess what makes it so difficult for me now is that we, and certainly as journalists, we're completely being dismissed. You know, I was in a car, as per usual. I was in a car with 3 white guys. We were sharing a lift, and one of the guys sitting next to me actually was a Trump supporter, and we were having a conversation, and he was talking about immigrants and how we take things from this country, and I said, actually, you know, if you look at all of the studies across the board, whether they're coming from the Rand Institute, which is kind of conservative, or the most leftist institute, or, you know, from Harvard on down, they all say that immigrants, undocumented and documented, are a net economic gain for the United States. And he looked at me and he said, there you go, making up facts, just like all journalists. What's the comeback? You know, I mean, I was nice to him, I was friendly, you know, but what's the comeback then? And so that's what I worry about in terms of the whole kind of dilution of the truth. And that those of us who are seeking the truth are somehow being perceived as activists. Thank you. Yes?
I'm a journalism teacher, and I've noticed a big uptick in interest among my high school students in journalism.
Yay!
And I'm doing my utmost to encourage them.
Yes.
But at the same time, they're very well aware that print journalism especially is don't want to say dying, but there's just newspapers dying around the country. What models do you see out there, or are people talking about for improving the state of journalism in the country in the future?
So, you know, when we say print journalism, it's like, well, the newspaper per se. You know, the newspaper per se may be dying, but the journalism that's coming out of that print journalism is not. I mean, we're depending so much, and by the way, they make a lot of mistakes. The New York, I mean, I have to couch this. It's not that they make factual mistakes, the New York Times or the Washington Post, oftentimes because of their own myopic vision of privilege and oftentimes white male privilege. They make some bad editorial decisions, but overwhelmingly I trust them. And so these 2 newspapers right now, and other papers, the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Sacramento Bee, I mean, has been hugely important in terms of breaking stories. So when your students are saying print journalism is dying, again, the paper is dying, but not the print, the digital, the pixel print is not dying, and we need it now more than ever. This is an active conversation. We don't have the answer. I'm very concerned because when the joke that I made about being these 5 things that this president doesn't like, I mean, it's a joke, but at the same time, there is a question, an actual legitimate question, as to how do we practice journalism when we have a white supremacist sympathizer in the White House and we are journalists of color? How do we practice journalism? What is the balance in that case? Today I'm pro-white supremacist, but tomorrow I'm anti-white supremacist. I mean, what when we're talking about that kind of a balance? So we are in the midst of the journalistic revolution in the United States of America, and we don't know how it's going to shake out. But it is of great concern to me when you look at those numbers. We're the country with free press, but we don't have any working journalists. You know, when you get those end of the year pitches and people are saying donate because we do frontline support for communities, I understand that, but there's also a conversation to be had about supporting the media that you believe in. And oftentimes people think, well, I can't support your nonprofit media company because I can't donate anything that's gonna make any impact. And actually, what people don't realize is, and you know this in the church too, it's not so much how much people are giving, it's that people are giving. Even if they're giving $1, it's that they're giving. So I wish that we could kind of make the whole of the United States of America just realize that to give just a little bit more for the media that they believe in. And by the way, I'm highly critical of what's happening in terms of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the government-funded arm that supports public media. So I'm not an employee of public media, neither NPR nor PBS, which is why I can criticize them, or the CPB. They need to be doing much better. They just need to be doing much better. And this gets really complicated because who are they accountable to? Members of Congress? Yikes. So having a truly independent public media would be a conversation worthy. Because right now, it's not all that. On the other hand, what is really exciting to me is, I mean, Futuro Media, I created it 8 years ago, thinking it was a completely insane thing to do. We've been around for 8.5 years. We are a national media company run by a Latina and an African-American woman in Harlem with about 25 employees. You know, that didn't exist 20 years ago. So that's why I'm saying it's very dynamic. We're losing some, but we're gaining other things. And if you're looking on social media, you know, the kinds of media offerings that are out there are fascinating. It is sad that we can't all agree on a set of facts, but there is extraordinary media that's being done independently. And after you subscribe to Latino USA and In the Thick, you can look at their media and subscribe to that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. I just want to talk about my daughter. I see a lot of her in you. She's short.
Petite. Petite.
Under 5 foot tall.
5 feet, yes.
And she's energetic. She's a woman. She's a daughter of an immigrant. I'm an immigrant. But she's not flat-chested.
Dad wanted to point that out, okay.
But she's also a journalist.
Okay.
And I've heard our president call her the enemy of the people.
Correct.
And so I'm afraid for my daughter. I'm afraid for all journalists, I'm afraid that she also may get harmed. And so I wanted to form an organization called Fathers of Enemy of the People.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that so much. Oh my God, I love that so much.
So do you have any advice on how I can get started?
Oh my God, that's so adorable. I don't know, just tweet something at me and I'll retweet it to my, 60,000 followers almost, and we'll start something. But I love that. Daughters of the enemy of the people. Or fathers of the enemies of the people. My dad will be an honorary member. Maybe we should do fathers and mothers of the enemies of the people. Okay? Parents of. See, we're all figuring it out already. You got it. Oh, I love that so much. Parents and friends like it even more. Anyway, you should totally do it. And I won't tell your daughter what you said about her chest. Yes.
In this atmosphere, Could you ever see what happened in Saudi Arabia ever happen here? And why or why not?
Yes. You know, the first story I told you was the story of how I arrived to this country with a green card. I found it very interesting that people were calling Anand Khashoggi a Saudi Arabian journalist. It's like, he's an American journalist. I had a green card until I was 29. I wasn't a Mexican student, I was an American girl. So this was, again, another way in which if you have people running newsrooms that have never had a green card, don't understand that, when you have a green card, you're not walking around saying, I'm different than you. The green card is basically saying, I'm like an American. By the way, the green card does not offer you much protection right now. But, so, yeah, I worry that, you know, as I said, I don't know what channel I was on MSNBC or if it was on In the Thick when I said it could have been me. I had a green card. It could have been me. So I'm very worried. I'm very, 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 very worried, which is why I love Parents of Enemies of the People, because we cannot let that happen. You know, I don't think that we walk around, women journalists of color walk around thinking that we have a target on our back, because we just don't think that way. But I think it would be naive of us to not think that there is somebody who is crazy, who is filled with hate, and who will be motivated by that hate to do something, I was going to say unthinkable, but it's not unthinkable, it's completely thinkable. You know, I think back, one of the things like you that gives me pause is our history. And we witnessed the assassination of our leaders. We witnessed the assassination of Martin Luther King. We saw it. And of Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy. We saw it. So we're not seeing that now. We are seeing massive terrorist attack committed by white men in schools and theaters and bars. So that, and churches, so that kind of violence is happening. We haven't, you know, yet seen these kind of targeted assassinations, but yeah, it horrifies me to name it, but we have to see what country we're living in. And the rock bottom part that we're hitting, I think that's the motivation for this. That's why you're here. That's why you're here. If Hillary had won, maybe some of the same horrors would have been happening, but we would have been not seeing and not understanding. You do know what Hillary Clinton said about the children from Central America that were coming over in 2015. Okay, so at that time it was in the kind of, well, migrants from Central America have been coming for years, mostly because the United States of America have been in Central America creating and wreaking havoc. But in 2015, when there was this sense that there was a larger number of children coming, and Hillary Clinton was interviewed by Christiana Mampour, and she said, oh, they need to go back. Those children need to go back. They can't come to the United States. And it was like, Hillary? Hello, protector of women and children, you're saying what? So many Latinos and Latinas who could not bring themselves to vote for Hillary because of that, and because she never apologized for saying that. So at least we're naming these things. So thank you for your question, but we need your support for sure. Thank you. Yes?
My question is also about Central America. And I'm a member of a group, Friends of San Juan. It's San Juan de Oriente in Nicaragua. And it's very hard to get news about what's happening in Nicaragua right now. What would you recommend? I mean, I go online and I get Reuters and Al Jazeera and sometimes BBC. And what is your take on what's happening there right now and how it affects us? Obviously, there's a lot of exodus of people coming.
I think it's the tip of the iceberg right now in terms of Nicaragua. We did some reporting on Latino USA about Nicaragua as well as on In the Thick, and we also own Latino Rebels. So I would watch Latino Rebels, which is a website for their information. It is very difficult to get information out of Nicaragua because there's just havoc going on in so many places. And I do think that we're going to see an increasing number of people coming out of Nicaragua because we're not even sure what's happening there. We can't even get the stories. Nicaragua to me is personally very sad because the people of Nicaragua who had lived under the dictatorship of Somoza really did something extraordinary by toppling a dictatorship. And those of us who can remember what they did in the first 5 years, the Sandinistas actually, of getting rid of illiteracy in the country. I mean, it was extraordinary. So to watch what's happened to the Sandinistas and to Daniel Ortega, who I never, ever, that thing that I was talking about, like the sixth sense and knowing somebody, Daniel Ortega, even way back when I was like, nah, this guy's like, So, yeah, Nicaragua is going to be the center of many people because you know that they're building the canal, right, for the Chinese. And so people are going to be displaced in a way that we can't even imagine in Nicaragua. So right now it's Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. Soon it will be Nicaragua. And I guess the question that I had around the caravan, it was like, people were freaking out about the fact that at the high point it was 7,000 people. Like, guys, Central America is millions upon millions upon millions of people. We're talking about only 7,000 people, please. And by the time they got to the border, it was what, down to 5, 4, 3? This is not a flood. This is desperation. This is people who cannot take it anymore. So this moment of people being turned away will also be remembered, and books will be written about it. Just the way that there's a book out right now that's going to be featured on In the Thick. It's called The German Girl, that looked at what happened with the St. Louis, the ship. It was called the St. Louis that left Europe with refugees from Germany and Austria, Jewish refugees, and they were rejected at all of the ports. They dropped a few off in Cuba, which is where this particular book, The German Girl, kind of takes place, but then they were sent back and they were gassed at Auschwitz. And now we have a book written about them. The horror is that, we're gonna have books written about what's happening at the border. It's like, it's the movie that I don't want to see. I mean, the movie of like, oh my God, and now this family was reunited, and now this family was, the reunification story. I'm just like, I'm sick of it. It's not a Hallmark story, a Hollywood story. These are human lives. And we just don't know the level of trauma and what it does to us. On In the Thick, we did an interview with a neuroscientist who said the separation of children, actually, this will have a physical impact on their bodies forever. It affects their brains. Now, some can recuperate, but the physical impact is imprinted in their brain. Yes, this is childhood trauma, and it's toxic trauma. And so some will be able, I asked this neuroscientist, I was like, well, so does that mean that they're all not going to make it? She was like, no, imagine like somebody comes and hacks your leg off. Some people will be able to figure out how to walk without the leg. They get the prosthetic, they'll get they'll be able to figure it out. And other people will never be able to figure it out after having their leg hacked off. And that's what we're dealing with. We just don't know how many of them will be able to make it. Yes.
So during the midterm elections, there was a lot of talk about the Latino voters not being reached out to. So what are we doing wrong? What do we need to do differently?
Well, that is true. Latina voters were essentially not engaged by the parties. And that's why the turnout, the fact that there was an uptick in turnout is so wonderful, because that happened even without the engagement. What I say is that if you are a community that is feeling particularly targeted, you need to have more engagement. And people say, well, no, wait a second, if you're feeling targeted, isn't that going to motivate you to come out and vote? Well, yes. I mean, I guess we saw that, yes, but there were others. There's so many voters that we left on the ground. I mean, not we, I'm not a member of any party, but there were so many voters who were left on the ground because they were not reached out to. So what we have to recognize is that both the Republicans and the Democrats have treated Latinos and Latinas and immigrants like political fodder for too long. It's just so crystal clear. I mean, let me see. It was at the beginning of the year when the Democrats were going to shut down the government over what? Over the Dreamers. What happened to that? They were like, oh, we believe in them, we're gonna shut down. Oh yeah, no, sorry, changed our mind, we're not gonna shut it down anymore. What's that? So that kind of confusing rhetoric, we understand what's going on. And so the party has to really make a concerted effort to do better. And when you ask me what to do, I'm not a political strategist, I don't know. But I know that door knocking goes a long way, and people feeling like they're being spoken to goes a long way. The good news is that, again, Latinos and Latinas are kind of taking it on their own. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think, is kind of leading the charge, but there are many other young Latinas who were elected, and Latinos. So I think we're witnessing something. Again, this is the cool part. It's all not negative. Part of the things that we're witnessing together as a country is also the uptick of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or Ana Maria Archila, who stood in the elevator and said to Jeff Flake, look at me when I'm speaking to you. Or Emma Gonzalez, who helped organize March for Our Lives out of the Parkland High School. So these are all the faces of young Latinas who are changing American political history forever. And we're all witnessing that too. So they're the ones that should be asked. You should be asking that question, what does the Democratic Party need to do better? I think they'd probably have a better answer, but engagement would go a long way. And actually, kind of having some policies that you stick to would go a long way, because we all know, I mean, seriously, we all know what the Republican stance is about immigration. Build a wall. Real clear, make it clear. I don't really know what the Democrats stand for. I have no idea what they stand for. Yes.
Hi, I'm Arturo from Mexico City.
¿Qué pasó, paisano?
Sí, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué onda?
¿Qué onda?
Yeah, I have some reflection, but I think I need your reflection about the situation in Mexico City. Not Mexico City, Mexico in this process historic now. New president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So I need your reflection now and appreciate so much you talk about.
So I just got back from Mexico City a couple of weeks ago. What will I tell you? I would tell you, one, that I'm hopeful because Mexican people became engaged in the electoral process like in a way that maybe you and I could not have imagined, right? I mean, it used to be that Mexicanos did not vote ever because the PRI was always winning, and now we actually see a phenomenal participation in electoral politics that has transformed the politics of Mexico. So that's like fascinating and wonderful, and street engagement and hopefulness in an electoral politics, which I think is fascinating. The downside is that we don't really know about Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And there are a lot of questions about his policy and his politics. So I'm on the fence. I will tell you that one of the things that has been really sad to witness, but not surprising, and as a Mexican, you know, Mexican nationalism is one of the things that I was able to kind of critique and look at with a distance from at a very young age. And I understood that I could critique Mexican nationalism as something that could be problematic. Mexicans are very nationalist. And so, so what we have witnessed recently out of Mexico is the increasing and the fanning of the flames of Mexican nationalism. So recently, with the caravan in Tijuana, we had Mexicans saying, "Mexico for Mexicans. Caravan, get out. We don't want you here." ¿Qué es eso? So this has to be very concerned. Also because Mexico has got to understand that they are an immigrant country now. They have immigrants from many different places. They are a country that is a receiving of immigrant countries. And to me, it's very disturbing, some of the politics that Mexican immigration, like if you fly into Mexico, they're so proud of the fact that they have their version of ICE. And they're like, yeah, you know, we're on our ATVs and we're saving lives. And it's just like, oh, this is great. You're looking just like the United States. So all of this is to say that I'm hopeful for the spirit of nuestra gente en Mexico con mucha esperanza. Like, I'm very hopeful of the spirit, but I'm also very doubtful about what the politic is going to bring in terms of this new presidency. But I guess what I know in Mexico is that at least there's an engagement and there's a street politic that is going to demand, or not, you know, because there's also, the other thing is that a lot of people love AMLO so much that they don't want to question him. So this is, again, another area of like, you know, he won, he's our guy, he's from the left, let's not question. So it's unclear yet. It's unclear yet. And his relationship with Trump, unclear, problematic. Sorry I didn't answer your question. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Wendy Aguilar. I am an immigrant from Guatemala. I came here when I was 10 years old. I'm also a woman and I'm a journalist as well. And I always wanted to be a reporter because I wanted to tell those stories that weren't being told and because I didn't see anybody who looked like me on TV. I've worked in Arizona, Texas, and Sacramento, and I always was very inspired by whenever I could push a story about Latinos. And I did a story about Friends of Nicaragua one time, so I'm really happy about that. But my last TV job that I had, the news director decided to let go of the freelancers, and I was one of them. He got rid of 3 women, and I couldn't help but to notice that the only 2 freelancers who were left behind were white men. So my question is, how do we keep going? How do we inspire more people of color to be in journalism in a world where we are saying more goodbyes to journalists every single day and they're getting out of the business?
Yeah, no, this is very distressing. It's very distressing when we're losing journalists, and yeah, we have to recognize that sometimes what you experienced is exactly what's going on. I mean, I would say to you, don't give up. You know, just keep on applying. There are a lot of places also that I run into. For example, I was recently, where was I? I can't remember if it was in North Carolina or if it was in Northern Illinois. Yeah, I know, it gets a little crazy, but they were just saying, you know, we're looking for Latina reporters, please have them apply. Because sometimes people don't want to go to these smaller markets and you know, and be working there. So I think that at the same time that you have what's going on in that newsroom, where it seems like you have a particular contraction that also had some ulterior motives, you also have other smaller television markets and networks that are looking precisely to increase their diversity. So don't give up. In particular, you don't give up. And just, if you can't, I made a decision that I was no longer going to be playing the game within the mainstream of having to ask for their permission to do what I wanted to do. So there's also that route of to do it on your own, but or to become the boss, right? So you become the news director, and you're like, oh no, I really like reporting. I know, I can see it. You're like, but I really like reporting. Yeah, but maybe what we really need is for you to be the news director. And then once you're the news director, you can name yourself the anchor. And, problem solved. I mean, white guys have done that. So we are going to encounter these challenges more and more. And by the way, people see me as very successful. You don't want to know the challenges that I face, because you'd be frightened. You'd be like, no, not you. Yeah. So we are all facing all kinds of different challenges. And el reto es seguir, right? So I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming. However I can help you, I'd be happy to. And just don't give up, because there's going to be a place where they're going to want to hire you. It just may mean that you'll have to leave beautiful Sacramento. Kansas, here you come.
So Maria, how are you holding up? Good for another couple of questions?
I'll take another two.
You briefly mentioned Hillary, which reminds me that if I pulled out a map of Illinois and put a 60-mile diameter circle on it, it would cover the place I grew up, and you grew up, and Hillary grew up. Would you do a little compare and contrast on you and Hillary?
Damn. No, I'm just surprised that nobody's ever asked me to do that, so I'm like, oh, all right.
Be careful, she's a United Methodist.
So I've been covering Hillary since she started to run for senator in New York. So when she did her first campaign event when she was running for senator in New York, I covered her, and I remember just thinking like, wow, she's really going to try and do this. She's really putting herself out there, and seeing how uncomfortable she was. I remember it was a bright pink suit, bad choice. But she worked so hard. Like Hillary was not the one who was sitting, on the chair and having things done for her. She was doing it. She's an incredibly hard worker. And I saw Hillary give a speech when she had recently stepped down from being Secretary of State. And it was a very powerful speech because she wasn't actually campaigning for anything. It was before she was running for president. And I was like, wow, that was an amazing political speech, because it actually wasn't a political speech. Her hair wasn't blown out. She didn't have any makeup on. It was, 7:30 in the morning, and she was not, and that was the time when I feel like I understood who she was the most. But then again, there's a lot of complicated stuff about Hillary. A lot of complicated stuff about Hillary. And I'm upset about the fact that she never sat down and gave me an interview. She didn't. She never, even after she wrote her book and wasn't running for anything, she wouldn't give me the interview. And, Hillary knows exactly who I am. So this compare and contrast, I'm kind of like, what are you afraid of, Hillary? Like, seriously? Come on. So there's a part of me that's like, yeah, what are you afraid of? I'm not that threatening. And you should be able to, you should make it a point to sit down and have an interview with someone like me. On the other hand, as a woman, I also identify with some of the things. I mean, the misogyny that she was subjected to, you know, the fact that she's been kind of passed over, a lot of things that have happened to Hillary I can identify with. But I will never forgive her for what she said about Central American kids until she apologizes. And I'm not so sure why she hasn't. I don't think she has, as far as I know, which is in and of itself silly. But thank you for the question. Where are you from in Chicago? DeKalb. Oh, DeKalb. Okay. Proud Southsider. Yes.
A few days ago, CNN fired Mark Lamont Hill for his comments at the United Nations about his support for Palestinian rights and so forth. And one of the things he said, I believe it was in a follow-up piece, was that for him, it was so important when he went to Flint, Michigan, to see Palestinians marching with the people of Flint, mostly African Americans. And so I'm kind of wondering about coalition building in your community and that sort of thing, and your general comments about this situation.
I don't know the specifics of what happened with Mark, so it's hard for me to, because I actually did not take the time yet to sit down and read in. I am horrified that a comment around Jewish-Palestinian relations would somehow lead to you getting fired. I'm really just a little bit struck by that at this point in time. And that CNN would choose to fire Mark out of all of their commentators. Mark would be the one that they challenge when you have several of their commentators who we know are actually repeating lies. You know, CNN is pretty complicated as an institution. I worked there for 8 years. I left there because they basically chose Lou Dobbs over me. And, you know, Lou Dobbs is long gone, but Lou Dobbs is one of the creators of this anti-immigrant insanity, and he did that while he was employed by CNN and supported by CNN. So I'm not sure what happened there. I would love for there to be an investigation as to what happened there, because there was another gentleman who brought up the question of anti-Semitism being used to take down progressive causes. And this is actually something we need to be hyper aware of, where accusations of anti-Semitism, and I'm not sure if Mark was accused of that, but basically supporting Palestinians would mean that he's anti-Israel or Jewish, so kind of borderline maybe anti-Semitic, but how anti-Semitic attacks are being used to take down progressive coalitions and movements. Because if you lob an anti-Semitic criticism, we all are so sensitive to that we'll say we can't have anything to do with somebody who's anywhere near anti-Semitic. And it's like, was it really anti-Semitic, or is something else going on? So thank you for both of those questions, because we have to be hyper aware of that.
There's a question. His comments were not anti-Semitic. They were critical of Israel.
Right.
And that's a difference.
That is a difference, but you see how there's a line there. I was very concerned. It's one of the reasons why I decided to form my own company, because I can't fire myself. Only if I want to. Only if I want to retire myself. But you guys, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I'm just not. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.